So we're privileged to have with us today Tim Kimmel, who is the Executive Director of Family Matters, whose goal is to see families reformed and transformed to be instruments of God's grace. And Tim, you've got a very wide international ministry. You've written many books, and we're really pleased to be able to tap your brains on this issue of grace-based parenting, because all of us are wanting to be better parents and to cultivate strong families in our churches. So can you tell us, first of all, what is grace-based parenting and what actually makes it distinctive from other forms, I guess, non-grace-based parenting?
I can summarize grace-based parenting in one sentence. It's simply treating your kids the way God treats his kids. That's when you sit back and just take that sentence as it is, and then you look at how God deals with us as a parent, and then how we tend to want to deal with our kids as parents. Many times we see our kids as an extension of our ego. Many times we expect our kids to mind us just to make our life more easier. We take it personally when our kids embarrass us. It's not uncommon for us to react to our kids' the things that they do wrong, and instead of want to discipline them, we want to punish them. Sometimes we want to get even with them. Sometimes we want to remind them all the sacrifices we have made on their behalf. Well, God doesn't do that with us. He doesn't treat us like that. And if he did, he wouldn't bring the best out of us, would he? But grace brings the best out of the people we love. Grace has a way of appealing to that part of them that longs to be loved in spite of themselves. And so we find that when grace is the default mode of the home, everything changes. In fact, I look at a lot of Christians struggle with performance-based Christianity. And so we put our kids on a checklist. We follow them around with a little spiritual report card. Well,
we compare them with other kids.
We compare them, God never does that to us, but we follow them around with this report card, and it's not uncommon for the kids to figure out, you know what, this game is fixed. No matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I try to measure up, I'm never going to make it. I'll always fall short of mom and dad's expectations. And I find that when we put our kids on a performance basis, they either make one grade or the other, the top grade or the bottom grade, the failing grade. But many of the kids that are making those top grades and really looking good, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're people pleasers. They don't want to let mom or dad down. And so they're jumping through all these hoops. Or the other ones figure out, I can't measure up anyway, so why try? I think I'll go rogue on them. I'll just rebel. I'll stick my finger in their eye because I can, and we'll just get there all miserable. And I say, we don't need to do that. But I don't want to qualify something. When I say grace-based parenting, a lot of people, they just start, whoa. Wait a minute. What about all the rules and regulations? Well, this grace thing makes me nervous because it sounds like you're just letting kids get away with murder.
Being permissive.
Yeah, being permissive. And when they say that to me, I always want to be gentle in my response to them, because I know something about them when they say that that they don't know about themselves. And that is, they don't get biblical grace. They don't get it. Because if they got biblical grace, they'd never make that off. Because I'd say, well, Jesus is dealing with us in grace, isn't he? Well, yeah. Did he throw the rule book overboard? Did he jettison it and say it doesn't matter anymore? Are there no more boundaries in our life? Are there no consequences? The Bible says, them whom he loves, he disciplines. So all the rules and regulations and expectations and boundaries are all right where they are, but it's the way we go about what we do and why we go about what we do. And that grace is felt in relationships. And when kids feel that, it's just something, they have a higher inclination to respond to us.
Now, how did you develop the concept of grace-based parenting? Was there some kind of personal journey for you as well?
Yeah, Pete, that's a great question. we came out of seminary, and we were working with a ministry called Young Life in the U.S., and it worked with young people. And then I was hired first at a church in Arizona as a youth pastor. And so I would work with the kids. And then my wife and I, after being married 8 years, we finally conceived, and we're going to have our first child. Well, like, you know, a lot of parents, we think, well, we don't want to mess this up. And so, you know, let's read the books that are out there and make sure we kind of come up to speed, because we've never done this before. And there weren't nearly as many books on parenting as there are now, but there were some, and there was a couple of helpful ones. But for the most part, we saw two basic types of books out there, where they were coming from. We saw books that accommodated what I just referred to as performance-based Christian parenting, and it was just kind of put your kids on these expectations and so forth. And it was a lot of sin management and evangelical behavioral modification and a lot of image control stuff. And we thought, well, we don't want that. That's dead on arrival. That won't work. It's just a matter of time before that'll all fall in on us. Then the other type of books were what I would say, they accommodated the other big group of parents I see among the Christian movement. That's what I call fear-based parents. And they were looking at all the awful things around us, the clear and present danger, the nasty culture, the contrary values, and the Hollywood influence, the musical influence, and so forth. And so they were suggesting more of a hunker down, isolate, high control, and so forth. We thought, well, that one's dead on arrival too. That won't work. And so we thought, well, what are we going to do? And here's what was interesting, Pete. And I think a lot of people might, if you stop and think about this, I went to a pretty good seminary. And I studied all kinds of theologies. I never once had somebody unpack for me a theology of family. Not once. No one ever unpacked a theology of marriage. Now, we looked at various passages on those things, but no one ever unpacked a theology of it. And I thought, well, that's strange, because, I mean, they had theologies on some of the weirdest things, but nothing on something as obvious as that. And we were praying, my wife and I were praying, we said, Lord, it's not like you to give us this much responsibility and not give us a clear path to follow. And then it's my wife, who was the brains of the operation, that made that observation. She made an observation followed by a question. And Pete, when she did this, it all cracked open for us. She said, no, wait a minute, Tim. God's a parent. He's a parent in the Bible. In fact, that's the number one metaphor for him in the Bible. And when Jesus taught us to pray, he said, pray, our Father who art in heaven. Here was the question. I wonder, what if we just studied him and his role as a parent in the Bible? I wonder if that would show us anything. And Pete, as soon as she said that, we found out not only is there a theology of parenting in there, it isn't even hidden. It's right on the surface. And then we thought, well, what is the kind of the leading feature of God's heart in his relationship? It's his grace. And that's why we called it grace-based parenting.
Now, you've talked already about some of the challenges, the second group of parents who are fear-based and wanting to protect their kids. And there are challenges out there. So
absolutely.
What are some of the really big challenges, do you think, facing parents raising children today?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because in saying fear-based parents, I'm not questioning that there isn't clear and present danger out there. There's a toxic culture. Satan doesn't want to trip us up. He wants to annihilate us. I don't question that. It's just that our God is bigger. And if fear is my starting point, it's going to define my parenting plan. I want God to be my starting point in his mighty power, and let that be my plan. I think the success illusion is a big problem that parents face, because we are inundated with messaging that says that you want to raise successful kids. And that sounds like a great idea until we see how they measure. They typically measure success. And in at least the Western culture, but I think it's infiltrating pretty much worldwide, the four ways we measure success are wealth, beauty, power, and fame. Now, in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. unless they're the goal of your life, unless that's what you're living for. And so we drink the Kool-Aid of this culture, and the next thing you know, we're pushing our kids, we're shifting the priorities of things. We're taking legitimate, good parts of life, and then we're putting them on a pedestal and almost worshiping them, like education. And we overemphasize education to the point where that's everything. In America, we see parents doing this in sports, and those all have their place, but they're not sovereign. And so it gets in the way of a lot of things we can do. And then I think the church many times is well intended, but can sometimes misguide us into thinking, once again, that the way you parent is you get your kids to act a certain way and know certain things. We want to make sure they've memorized these scriptures and they have a biblical worldview and they have all these apologetical arguments. Well, we wanted that for our kids, but we also remembered the Bible didn't say, "Thy word have I hid in my head." It said, "Thy word have I hid in my heart," and that changes a lot of things.
I just want to pick up on a phrase you dropped in just a little while ago. You talked about a parenting plan. What's a parenting plan, and perhaps even more importantly, how do two parents, mother and father, work together in being able to develop a parenting plan that really works?
I think the best starting point for two Christian parents when it comes to a parenting plan is to start with saying, the one plan we don't want is our plan. We want God's plan. We want to turn to Him, because we all come to the table with, our family of origin. That plays a lot in it, and we're either wanting to emulate that or do anything but that. And so, what we've done is we've distilled God's grace down. We actually draw a house for people, and we say God's grace kind of comes at us at 4 levels. He appeals to our core needs. He sets our hearts free. He builds our character and our character muscles, and then he aims us at something bigger and better than here and now and ourselves, at what we call true greatness and eternal priorities. And then what we do in this house is we break down those needs, those freedoms, and let me just do that real fast. And may I suggest too that if they want to actually see this played out in just a few minutes, they can go to our website at familymatters.net. That's familymatters.net. They go there and they'll see a little animated video. They click on that and it'll unpack this house. But the 3 inner needs that God's grace is always appealing to you and me are, He knows that He made us, so He knows that we long to be secure, and He gives us a secure love. He knows that we need intrinsic worth, that we want to be significant. He gives us a significant purpose, that we want to be strong. He gives us a strong hope. And so as a parent, I want every word I say, every action to appeal to a secure love, a significant purpose, a strong hope. He sets our hearts free. The 4 wonderful freedoms God's grace has always given you and me. He's given us the freedom to be different. I mean, like weird, bizarre, strange, goofy, quirky. God relishes that. He celebrates that. Fear-based parents don't. Performance. So give us the freedom to be different, freedom to be vulnerable. We don't have to wear masks around Him. Freedom to be candid. In Hebrews chapter 4, he says, "Come boldly to my throne of grace." You don't have a high priest that doesn't understand what it's like to be in your skin. Come boldly to my throne of grace and find mercy. Freedom to be candid. Freedom to make mistakes. I'm not saying there aren't consequences for it, because discipline is a form of grace. He's just saying this will not, whatever you do has nothing to do with whether I love you. And you can't. And then the character muscles. And let me talk about the roots that we put in the house. The 4 wonderful qualities that God's grace appeals to us is a humble heart, a grateful heart, a generous heart, and a servant's heart. And so we basically took God's grace and we quantified it. And we said, this is what He's doing with us. Why don't we do that in our home? And we had 4 children, and we gave birth to 4 sinners, and they were raised by 2 sinners, and yet God's grace came along there, and they did all the normal things that kids do, and we made all the normal mistakes that parents make, but God's grace came in there. He says love covers a multitude of mistakes. And there was a sense that it took over our home. And it really helped us maintain heart connection. Heart connection. Can I define heart connection for you? Because in fact, let me get my phone out here. I've been working on a definition of this. Because I think the bigger job for us parents, our job as parents is to connect to our children's heart in such a way that we incline them to want to connect to God's heart. Well, you can't do that if you're condemning them, if you're browbeating them, if you're constantly comparing them or criticizing them or guilting them or shaming them. So here's we'll see what you think. Okay, heart connection with a child. Heart connection is when I delight in living in a way that breeds trust and consistently adds value to my child's identity as an individual. Let me say that one more time. Is I delight in living in a way that breeds trust and consistently adds value to his or her identity as an individual. Well, if kids are brought up in that kind of environment, they're more inclined to, follow our lead and take our advice and not see us as the enemy.
Now, we're talking about bringing up kids, raising kids. There's a direction and then there's an end point, isn't there? We're wanting them to be mature adults, to know who they are in Christ. So can you unpack for us the biblical vision of bringing children through to becoming mature adults?
My number one prayer for my kids all through their childhood is that they would develop a tender heart for God through his word. That I want them to know Jesus through his word. And we thought, that's hard for them to ever find that if they don't see their mom and dad doing that, pursuing Christ through his word. And we want to have kids who basically move into adulthood, and they want that our goal was to raise kids that have a passionate love for Jesus Christ that shows itself in an unquenchable love and concern for others. We felt like the real evidence of God's grace in somebody's heart is that they're outwardly focused towards the people around them. And, well, how do you do that? That's actually not a difficult thing to do. You show them what it looks like in your own life. And when you figure you take two crooked sticks like my wife and I, what do we know? But God's grace comes in there and he does things in us crooked sticks. I have a friend that says God picks up crooked sticks and draws straight lines with them all the time. And so that our aim was to raise kids that have a passionate love for Jesus, shows itself in unquenchable love and concern for others. And God has blessed that goal in the kids. And it's not because they had great parents. It's not because we knew something that we were just as lame and desperate as anybody else. We just had a mighty God.
You said right at the beginning that the essence of grace-based parenting is to bring up our own kids in the way that God brings us up. So how is God our model for parenting?
Yes. When we sin and we go against God's heart, he feels it. He doesn't come back to us with shame. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Do you understand what I did for you? I sent my son to can't you figure this out? What part of this price tag aren't you getting? That doesn't come from our God. He's always looking at us through a lens that values us in spite of ourselves. And as far as our sin, he's looking at a lens of shed blood for that. And so when I look at how God deals with us, I see him so different than how I would want to deal with somebody up close to me if I was just walking in my ego and my flesh. which is real easy to do even as a Christian. And so the more we study God, and I don't think you can really do this without personally walking with God in an intimate way through His Word. My wife was always really good at that from the beginning. She was read the Scriptures daily and prayed. And I was in seminary, and in ministry we read the Bible all the time and we teach it. But to be with God, just that took me a while to pick up speed on that. But it was my wife's example to me that changed everything.
Now, you said right at the beginning that the two mistakes people fall into of performance-based parenting or fear-based parenting is that they don't understand God's grace. So how does a proper understanding of God's grace actually shape and influence the way that we parent ourselves?
Well, one thing I like about God's grace is that it covers all the things that we think are sometimes missing in a parenting plan. Like I said, a proper view of God's grace shows that it is not lacking in boundaries. It's not lacking in discipline and correction. The rules and regulations, they're all right there in place. In fact, here's the way I like to say it. If I was talking about grace-based parenting, we want to have raise kids, we want to have families that are guided by God's truth, all the while tempered by His grace. Tempered by His grace. Let me give you an illustration. But I'm American, so I think in Fahrenheit. And you do Celsius, right? So you're going to have
do both.
Okay. Well, you'll have to calculate this for me. Let's say right now, would you say, since we started our conversation, that so far we've spoken respectfully to each other?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. And we've spoken respectfully about God and reverently about God. And I've quoted some scripture. Have we used the scripture accurately? I mean, we're trying to get it all right biblically, right? Okay. But what if it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit here? What would that be Celsius?
0.
Okay.
Just under 0.
Okay. What if it was 0 Celsius and we're dressed just like we are now?
Yeah.
See, it wouldn't matter how right we're getting it. It wouldn't matter how respectfully. It wouldn't matter how accurately we are getting the word. We would be so cold. And see, we can have homes that are getting it biblically right, but the temperature in the relationships is 0 Celsius. And that's what happens when God's grace is missing. So, especially if I'm trying to do all these good things for wrong reasons, to make sure that my parents don't get disappointed in me or get mad at me or measure me against someone else. And so God's grace changes everything on that.
What are the deepest needs of our children, do you think?
Yeah.
And how can we effectively shape our parenting so that it's really addressing those needs?
I think that question there is a profound question, because I think if we can answer that accurately, it sure can make our job as parents a lot, I don't want to say easier, just clearer. And I see 3 basic needs of a human heart. And psychologists recognize these things, sociologists recognize these things, but I think more importantly, the scriptures recognize these things. We all need to know we're secure. When a baby's born, and after they kind of clean them all up and do what do? They wrap them up like a little burrito, and they swaddle him. Why? Because he was inside a womb, or she was inside a womb, and if they let him flail around, they right away start feeling afraid. So they swaddle them, and they hold them, because they need to know they're secure. And so the way we meet them is give them a secure love. And let me define love. I like to define love as a commitment of my will to your needs and best interests, regardless of the cost. And so give them a secure love. The second need all children have is they need to know they're significant, that they have intrinsic worth and value. And the way we build that is give them a significant purpose. And I mean, there's so many purposes that God has built into us. We have, obviously spiritual purposes, relational purposes. We have vocational purposes, intellectual purposes. As a parent comes along and helps harness those and build those, a kid feels, okay, I can bring value to this. The third need is we all need to know we're strong or sufficient for the moment we're in. And, well, the way God comes along there in His grace is He gives us a strong hope. Sometimes people ask me, you're at a party or you meet somebody and say, well, what do you do for a living? If I just want to kind of mess with their head or see where the conversation goes, I sometimes say, oh, I'm in the hope business. I go around and show people where they can find hope, because I think most people could use more. Well, when we have a home where the words you're saying and actions you're giving towards that child or that grandchild is always appealing to one or more of those needs for a secure love, a significant purpose, a strong hope, those kids can just grow up in that home, and automatically they just thrive better. And then think about teenagers. What's the three number one problems that teenagers deal with? Insecurity, insignificance, and inadequacy. So if we from the beginning are appealing to these three needs in our homes, then we've already given them a gift for their teenage years. They can get through those so much better.
Yeah. So secure love, significant purpose. And a strong hope.
Strong hope.
And we can see how that would build children up and really affirm them. Mm-hmm. But I guess there'd be some people listening to this, watching this, who are thinking, yeah, but what's the place for discipline and boundaries within grace-based parenting? Is there discipline, and how does that work itself out?
In fact, one of the ways I build a significant purpose into my kid is I discipline them. You see, like God says, God accepts us as we are, but He loves us too much to leave us that way, right? And He's always building us up. So one of the ways you build a significant purpose into a kid is you discipline and correct them when they step out of bounds. One of the ways a kid feels secure is, once again, through discipline and correction. They're highly valued. How do you really unleash the strength of somebody? Well, when you think of so many, like the strength of a train, what makes this train so strong? The tracks that it stays on. If it stays on those two narrow blades there and confines itself to those, look at how powerful it is. When it leaves them, we call them a train wreck. And so discipline is in all three of those.
We talked before about the temperature of a home and the quality of the relationship between the two parents. How does the presence of God's grace reshape our marriages so that they are effective in providing grace-based parenting?
Well, to me, if grace starts anywhere, it's got to be in a marriage. In fact, I'll tell you, I think, Pete, that the two toughest relationships we have in life are with our spouse and with our kids, because they're the closest ones we have. They're the ones we've invested the most in. So they're the ones where we probably gain the greatest sense of joy in life, but also have our hearts broken the most. And they are the two metaphors right out of the Bible that God uses with us. And so, man, if you need grace anywhere, you need it in a marriage. You know what I think most people think they need in marriage is love. And I've been to a lot of weddings. I've performed my share of weddings. I have yet to be at one where I didn't sense there was a lot of love standing in front of me, or in front of that church. A lot of love. Aren't they exciting? They're so in love. And then you see the same couple 5 years, 10 years later. And boy, that love's gotten some wear and tear on it, It's got some scar tissue. And it's struggling to thrive. Well, that's because I think love, I'm going to say something, it's going to sound unbiblical, okay, but hear me out. See, love fails us. You say, wait a minute. 1 Corinthians 13 says love never fails. But whose love is it talking about there? It's God's love never fails. but your love, my love, the problem is it's your love or my love, or my wife Darcy's love, or your wife's love. It's got limits to it. We need grace. I look at grace as the Kevlar that God gave us to cover our love with. And if people are not familiar with that term, Kevlar is what soldiers wear, or policemen wear. It's like the bulletproof vests. And grace is what God puts over that love to protect it. And so if I just take off in my marriage with just love, it's just a matter of time where that's going to be tested. In fact, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but track with me on this, see if this makes sense. I took my wife out to a special dinner one night. We were young and just starting out, had a few kids, and we were all tired, and I wanted to do something special for her. And I went earlier and left a gift there with a maitre d', and I said, when it comes to dessert time, will you kind of have the guy bring this to our table? And then there was a little card, so I just wrote something on the card. He delivers it, and she opened the card to look at it, and I could just sit. I'm looking at her face, and I could tell that whatever I said on that didn't go over well, or didn't record well. And I didn't even remember what I said because I'd written in haste. And then she put it away and started. I said, "Wait a minute, did I say something wrong?" I said, "Oh, don't worry, nothing." Wait a minute, what did I do? What did I say? And then she turned around, and I'd said this. My wife's name is Darcy. I said, "Darcy, you're my reason for living. Happy birthday." I'd heard somebody else say it. It sounded romantic, so I said it. And she said, "Tim, I can't be your reason for living. I can't do that for you. I'll let you down. I'll make mistakes. I'll fall short. And what if I die? Then what?" And I thought, wait, she's going theological on me right here, and we're trying to have dinner, and this was become intense. But she was right. And I think when we come to our marriage, we think, okay, like I said, I want to bring my love for God to my marriage, and I want to bring my love for God and love Darcy with it. But that's a mistake. And here's why: because it's my love. My love is limited. My love pushed enough will fall short. And I like to put it this way: it's not my love for Darcy, it's not my love for God that I want to bring to my wife. It's God's love for me I want to bring to my wife. It's God, in other words, God's love coming through me. And that would require, assume, my intimate relationship with him. The more my grace-based marriage is really based on your relationship with Jesus individually. And the more he is coming through me, his love is unlimited. His love can take those hits.
So we've talked about grace-based parenting, raising our kids as God raises us. Mm-hmm. And you're now just talking about grace-based marriage, which I guess is relating to our marriage partner as God models marriage. So how does Jesus model marriage? How's Jesus the model spouse for us?
Probably he showed it right out of the blocks when he asked us to marry him. Now, everybody has different traditions, but I think proposals are fairly common all over the world, and it's usually the guy that initiates that and tries to set a setting and all that. And there's a lot of different settings I've seen, but there's one place I think would be a lousy place to ask somebody to marry you, and that's at a public execution. But that's exactly where Jesus went, isn't it? He went to a public execution, and that was supposed to be our execution for our sin. And he says, no, I want to marry you. I love you. I want to have oneness with you. But I got to pay the dowry price. And the dowry price, somebody's got to die. And I'm going to die for you. And he started right out of the blocks giving complete sacrifice for us. And I think the more we are in tune with him, Pete, I think the more we can bring that to our marriage. For Darcy and I, we have found that we do better in our marriage when we just preach the gospel to ourselves individually every day. revisit the cross. We revisit what Jesus did for us individually. And it makes it so much easier that when we go through all the issues and pressures of life.
The Bible uses marriage as a very powerful allegory about the relationship that Christ has with his bride, the church.
Yes.
And Paul talks, doesn't he, about the mystery. He said, when he's talking about marriage, I'm talking about Christ and the church. And our marriages are meant to be a model of that beautiful, eternal relationship. So how can our marriages be grace-based to the extent that they really show God's glory to the world, to our kids, to our churches, to our communities, to our families?
One of the ways is we turn our back on our typical way of viewing each other when we walk in our own selfish power. In the book Grace-Filled Marriage, we talked about these three lenses that we look through. The me lens, where everything's being evaluated by how that impacts me. It's a very selfish-based lens. Or the love-if lens. And it's the conditions that are put on it based on, many times it's a reaction to the other person. Or the worst one of all, the toxic one of all, the pious lens, where we kind of use the Bible or God to try and strong arm or heavy hand or manipulate or get behavior out of our spouse that is really our selfish agenda. And I say, no, put the grace lens in front of it. Treat your spouse the way Jesus treats you. And I think that it's much like in grace-based parenting. One thing that helps me treat my wife with grace is keep in mind how long she'll live. Now, we took our vows till death us do part, right? But I actually know how long my wife will live. She knows how long I'll live. I know how long all my kids will live. I know how long everybody that's listening to this kids will live. I know how long your kids will live because they all live the same age. They live forever. They live forever. Time and space is how we tend to focus, but really there's a much bigger picture. And when I love my wife with eternity in mind, not so much that I'm going to be married to her in heaven, because we're going to be married to the Lord in heaven, but right now I want to treat her in such a way that when she is in eternity and she is the bride of Christ, that I will have presented her to him, as Ephesians 5 says we should. And the same with our children. If I raise them with eternity in mind, it helps me keep, all the pressures of time, space a little bit more in check. But
Tim, thanks so much for your time and for sharing this with us. Grace-based marriage, grace-based parenting.
You bet. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.